Welcome back, another episode of Music in the Stars here. Today, in this video, we're going to take a deep look at Chiron, who Chiron is, what Chiron represents, how we can find it in our own personal charts, and how it might be affected by different aspects, different transits, and what that means for us. I'm also going to relate that to Mercury Retrograde because right now, the transit is Mercury is retrograde in the sign of Aries, conjunct Chiron in Aries. So let's get into it. So I've been really contemplating Chiron lately. Many of you have heard me say in my previous videos that I don't talk a lot about asteroids, but I'm super fascinated by Chiron because it represents the wounded healer. And I believe when we actually go in to the places within ourselves where we're wounded, the pain, the grief that we all tend to carry yet bury, when we go in there bravely and look at these places and actively work to heal these places, then we better ourselves, we better the world around us, and in turn, we help our communities, we help the planet, we help everyone else and everything around us heal. And that is what it's all about. So, who is Chiron? Mythologically speaking, in Greek mythology, Chiron was a centaur that was accidentally wounded, and he became a wise teacher, a wise healer, but ironically, he could not heal himself. So I feel like right there's a clue. What does that mean for us? This wise sage of a healer could not heal himself. So right away, this brings up questions of inadequacy, right? Failure, vulnerability. We have to look at these places within ourselves. We have to look at our own sense, our own essence of self-worth. Check out whether we hold ourselves down. Check out whether we really believe in our gifts. Or we fall into our fears, or we fall into worrying about what others think, worrying about if we're going to succeed or if we're going to fail. We have to rise above these things in order to really heal and really push forward and really access our power. So this is the key. Accessing our power by rising above feelings of inadequacy, fears. How do we do that? It's different for every single one of us. Astrologically speaking, we each have to look in our chart, see what sign and what house Chiron is in your chart. This tells us where the wound is and how we're likely going about expressing that wound. This area in our chart, let's remember, the houses represent the areas within our life where we express the archetypes, where we express the energies that are happening through us. Again, not to us, but through us. So we go into our chart, we find what house. That's going to tell us likely where our wounds lie and where we are expressing those wounds. We look and see what sign it is. It tells us how we're expressing it. For example, if it's in Cancer, it's likely in the heart. It could be connected to our mother. Oftentimes, Cancer, ruled by the moon, is connected to the maternal side of life. So we go in and we find those places and we see, am I wounded there? Does this wound come from this lifetime? Or is it something that's come in through our ancestral ray from a different time? All of this is possible. You know, the epigenetics is a real thing coming in through our lifelines, through our bloodlines, through our DNA. My Chiron, for example, is in the sign of Aries, which is where Chiron is right now. So that's going to affect my own personal willpower, my own personal drive. You know, my bravery of charging forth into the world. It's in the 8th house for me. So the area of life that has to do with life and death, that has to do with transformations, transmutations. Like this is an area that I tend to go into, potentially overcompensate for. Because that is one thing we need to look for. When we have these wounds, when we have these areas in our life where where we feel a sense of vulnerability, where we feel a sense of inadequacy because we're wounded there, then we tend to put more energy there and tend to try to rise above that. So what would that mean for me? I'm just using myself as an example just so we can relate to it. In your chart, it could be in the 4th house, it could be in the 1st house, it could be in any one of the houses, and depending on when you were born, it'll be could be in any particular sign. Currently, Aries. So for me, it's happening conjunct my natal Chiron, because the current transiting Chiron is also in Aries. So it's really triggering my wounds, and I must admit I've been feeling that lately. I've definitely been pretty emotional, pretty watery, which has been fantastic, because to me that means the calcification is cracking around the shell in order for energy to move, which we must continue to pursue in our lives so we don't crystallize and calcify as we get old, and then that's it. We no longer learn, we no longer continue forward and express our truth because we've given up, in a sense. So Chiron gives us an opportunity to not calcify as human beings, gives us an opportunity to stay connected to what keeps our heart bleeding, what keeps us moving, what keeps that energy flowing. Life is strange that way, right? The joys and the pains, like it's all connected in one. I think it was Khalil Gibran that said in his beautiful book, The Prophet, we can only love as deeply as our wounds have gone. And I'm paraphrasing that, but the point being, as deep as that sword of the wound has gone into us, into our hearts, into our souls, as deep as that wound goes, that's as deep as we can love. So the two are connected. So Chiron, for me, connects to the spirit of love in a way. Connects to the spirit of how we can offer the depth of our heart through the depths of our wounds. So Chiron is such a blessing if we're willing to be brave and go into those wounds. You know, right now, again, it's in Aries. Aries has to do with bravery. It's the bravest of all the signs. It's the first sign of the zodiac, cardinal fire, charging forward through inspiration, making it happen. So somewhere in me, it's suggesting there's a wound in that. Perhaps I judge myself, or I'll compare myself with others, which I do, you know. That's why I didn't actually even do my astrology for the longest time, because, you know, there were fears of what others would think, or am I going to be considered, you know, woo-woo? Am I going to be considered this? And then you come to a point where it does not matter. You rise above any of those fears that we may have in life, and we offer our truth. And in doing so, it helps people. You know, my intention behind doing my astrology work, any of my tarot work, it's to help people. It's to offer something good for them to awaken within themselves, and in turn live their truth, and in turn share that inspiration with their own communities and with the world, and help this beautiful planet that we all love so much and live upon and nurture and care for. So we get there through healing our wounds. This is what Chiron is telling us. So please, if you would, go into your natal chart, find where Chiron is for you, find the sign, find the house, learn what the different meanings are behind those two parts of astrology, behind the house, behind the sign, and start to dig into where your own wounds are. Really look at that, see how it's reflected in your life. And then start asking yourself questions in those areas of, like, where do I feel inadequate? Where do I feel vulnerable? Am I protecting myself from these feelings? Do I have fears here? Can I be brave to go into here, to go into these places, to heal that for the intention of bettering myself and in turn bettering the world around me? These are the questions that Chiron asks us. Now, let's connect that to Mercury in retrograde. Mercury, as we remember, is the intellect, right? It's the archetypal symbol, the archetypal planet representing how we communicate, how we share our thoughts. Mythologically speaking, this is Hermes, the messenger of the gods. In the tarot, this is the magician card. The magician brings down those messages from God to the world below. Again, he stands in front of a table with a wand, with a cup, with pentacles, with a sword. These are the four worlds of the four bodies: the mind, the heart, the body, the spirit. This is where the energy comes through, the messages come through and flow into the world around us. So it comes through Mercury. Mercury being retrograde, so it's now not an outward expression, right? Now it's inward. So all of these messages, there's an opportunity now for all these messages to be turned inward. It can create chaos in the world. That's what everybody freaks out about, right? Because it rules technology, it rules communication, it rules, so things like our computers, things like our making travel plans, things that are more organized in the sense that require conscious mental acuity can sometimes go awry. But we just take that and we move it inward and we apply these times towards ourselves, towards our own personal evolution and our own personal growth. Combine that with Aries, because that's the sign that it's in, ruled by Mars. So now it's affecting our willpower, it's affecting our strength, it's affecting our, reasons for being, why we get up in the morning and do the things that we do. We're now looking at that. This Aries energy, Aries, again, the cardinal fire, the new beginnings. This is an opportunity to reset. I talked about this in my video in regards to the solar eclipse with the conjunct Mercury retrograde, conjunct Chiron, coming through that new beginning portal. It's still happening, it's still active now as Mercury is still conjunct the sun and conjunct Chiron. So what I want to do is talk about how would a Mercury retrograde in Aries right on top of a Chiron in Aries, what would that look like? It's all about putting one's conscious focus, conscious intention to those wounds, into those places, within our hearts, within our souls, within whatever area of life where those wounds show up. Whatever sign it's in, right? Whatever house it's in. But again, let's remember, it's not so black and white in the sense of, just because Mercury is retrograde Chiron right now, that's going to affect all of us the same. It will not. It depends on what our own Chiron is in and in which house, and if that's creating any sort of aspect. Again, for me, it's conjunct, right? So it's like really augmented. The power of it right now is right on top of my own personal wounds, my own personal power. And so it's really active for me, but it could be a square for another person, creating a sense of like blockages, like that would indicate sort of a wound that you can't quite feel, or perhaps becomes more prevalent because you realize that there's a tension there, that something is asking to be looked at. That would be a square. And then a trine, for example, would be an easy flow of energy through that. So again, that would be up to you to go and dig into your chart and find out what aspects are happening, because the transits always hit trigger points. It always triggers different parts of our natal chart, which then reflects and turn out into the here and now. That's what we do with astrology. It shows how we are affected right here and living our lives here and now through the movements of the planets, through our own more static planets that we would say, through the natal chart. So a Mercury retrograde in the sign of Aries, conjunct Chiron in the sign of Aries, indicates essentially looking within at our own sense of will and strength and our power of moving forward into new beginnings, into new endeavors, our inspiration through that fire, through that cardinal fire of Aries. But really looking at it consciously through that Mercury energy, bringing those messages from the gods down through our beings into ourselves, shining them straight into those wounds. healing those wounds, healing our vulnerabilities, healing those places within ourselves that we're afraid to look at. Because whether you want to admit it or not, we all have fears. It doesn't matter if you're like the biggest, strongest, like most confident seeming person out there. There are things within, those voices within that sort of, pick away and plant those seeds of doubt, those seeds of fear, those seeds of doubt and fear and inadequacy and all of that come through Chiron. These are the wounds that we look at. I think it was Carl Jung that said, to find your purpose. Again, I tend to paraphrase things, but this is essentially what he's saying. To find your purpose in life, go to where your fear lies. Go to where you're afraid. And there lies your work. So Chiron is teaching us the same thing. Go to the places that you're afraid, and there lies your work. Right now, it's an opportunity to really look at that and communicate that with the Mercury Retrograde. So lots of good stuff, lots of potentially painful stuff, lots of work, but yet through that work, lots of evolution, lots of growth, which is awesome because that's who we are and what we need in order to be better within ourselves. And like I say, better in our communities, better in our families, and thus better people on this planet that we love so very much and who needs us to awaken the truth in ourselves. So that is the music in the stars for today. Thank you for joining me. Please subscribe to my channel below. If you like this video, hit the like button. You can do the bell ringing thing if you want to keep track and hear when I put out more content, because I will, because we're going to keep this going. And thank you so very much.